Hi everyone, Captain Ahab here with Rhyme Signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of holding the biggest grudge against a cetacean in literary history. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new The Ocean album, Holocene. The Ocean had been kind of a big deal for me in my musical library since 2013's Pelagial burst onto the scene. I remember vividly hearing the buzz about this record and finding the conceptual idea of exploring the unknown depths of the deepest, darkest recesses of the seas to be a fascinating idea for a running theme in an album, and it certainly didn't disappoint. Pelagial remains one of my all-time favourite albums, not just conceptually, but in musical execution as well. It's a brilliant slice of combining the perfect level of atmospherics with bone-shuddering riffs and face-melting savagery. I love it with my whole heart, and if you are unfamiliar with The Ocean as a band, I cannot think of a more perfect place to start. The band continued to impress despite the lengthy break between Pelagial and the two follow-up records of Phanerozoic Parts 1 and 2. These still managed to similarly wipe the floor with me though, combining everything I'd come to love from post-metal with their own delightful personality, and cemented The Ocean as one of my favourite bands, and one I'd come to rely on as Old Faithful, a band I knew would scratch a particular itch should it ever come a-knockin'. Now the main thing that I'd come to expect from the band, the biggest draw of them for me, was the focus on their excellent guitar-driven structures and just how well they can tell a story with their axe work. So when Holocene was announced and the initial singles seemed to dictate a more electronic-focused album, I was, in truth, a little concerned. Now The Ocean aren't strangers to this kind of musicality, and this certainly isn't their first rodeo into these sorts of sounds, but regardless, I would be lying to you all if I said I wasn't worried. So often a band will make a departure from their established norm and it doesn't work, it falls flat and marks the beginning of what can only be perceived as the decline of the band. Now we all know at least one band, in some cases several, to whom this applies, and I was mortified at the possibility that my beloved Ocean was about to suffer from the most grievous of all fates. Now I generally try to avoid listening to pre-release singles on the lead up to a new album, but where it seems like the times they are a-changin', then I feel almost duty-bound to do so, in an effort to keep my addled nerves at bay. And I won't lie, Holocene had me sweating prior to the release of the album. Context is often king, which is why I don't really listen to pre-release singles, especially when one such single is the closing track off the album. And I will be honest, taken out of context, the singles from Holocene simply weren't really grabbing me. It felt there was, something missing. The bite felt absent. There was a greater emphasis on electronic elements and an increased focus on vocals. It felt like the huge riffs and the memorable guitar melodies had, well, not been forgotten, definitely taken second fiddle, and my concern continued. Fortunately, my worries have mostly been swept away, as Holocene is an extremely good album when taken in context. Make no mistake, I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you. This is probably their weakest album for me since Anthropocentric, but when you consider just how strong their discography is, heliocentric notwithstanding, this is still reasonably high praise, and to come off the back of both Phanerozoic albums to be even half as good of those would still be a win in my books. The band have called Holocene the epilogue to these two albums, and for better or worse, I would agree that fits within that categorization. When we think about an epilogue, I for one certainly imagine a winding down process. There's less of an emphasis on the climb and more of a focus on trying to, tie up loose ends, cut off the dead wood, and engage in a more focused process to really finally hit on the finality of the story, theme, or project. And this is absolutely Holocene in a nutshell. So, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the electronic elements that have been woven into the album. As a general rule, these work really well, but it's better taken as a whole across the record rather than any individual particular moments. They sound good, there's a certain darkness and unsettling edge to them, and they are definitely being used for texture rather than to dazzle the listener's attention with sweeping scales and complex notations. This is most assuredly not The Ocean hiring Rick Wakeman to bust out a sick piano solo. This is The Ocean using new means by which to generate an appropriate mood or feeling, and in this respect the electronic elements are a great success. As I mentioned though, on a track-by-track basis they're largely just kind of there. which honestly, when taken in context, and there's that word again, they work extremely well. This is about the long play. The payoff to the impact of the electronic elements only really feels satisfying and worth the investment as the final beats of Subatlantic fade into the background, which honestly makes the inclusion of that as the last song as a single all the more baffling, as this song only really unveils its secrets and intimacies within the full appreciation of the 45 minutes that led up to it. Holocene does, somewhat frustratingly due to the nature of what the band have taken on board, take a little while to get going. I honestly found the first 3 tracks of Pre-Boreal, Boreal, and Sea of Reeds to be, I don't know, a little slow, a little safe, and maybe a little predictable, feeling like I was witnessing some of the band's old tricks again, but just, not done as effectively as they have done in the past. It's really only from Atlantic onwards that I found Holocene really opening up and showing us more of what this record is, and how it differentiates itself from the rest of the band's discography. This sort of second 2/3 of the record is where Holocene went from feeling, mildly disappointing, to me starting to understand the point of this album, to appreciate how good of an epilogue from the previous 2 albums this is, and that although it might feel slower and less immediately rewarding, it is no less fascinating. Special mention must go to the track Unconformities, which I feel is one of the best tracks in the band's catalogue, even when taken outside of the record. Having vocals provided by Karen Park in the first half or so of the song really works to grab your attention, as Loic Rossetti's thick and masculine timbre is suddenly replaced by this beautiful, vulnerable, powerful femininity, which absolutely threw me on first listen. Park's vocals are magnificent, and I will look forward to hearing her other projects in the future, but what this track really reminded me of was the album Mariner by Cult of Luna, which featured Julie Christmas on vocals. And it too has this incredible dichotomy in vocal stylings, and that just so happens to be my favourite Cult of Luna album, so it is no wonder that I gravitated towards this song so much. I would love to see The Ocean take a similar approach for whatever comes after Holocene, and do maybe a full album with Karen Park, as frankly, dang. The way the second half of this track explodes, with Loic repeating the line of "Don't turn on the bright lights" over and over throughout the rest of the track's runtime, is spine-tingling, and serves as one of the heaviest moments on the album, not just musically, but thematically as well, reminding me of some of the more crushing parts of Pelagial. I can imagine this track splitting the fanbase's opinion though, but honestly the same can very much be said about Holocene in general. Now, I've spoken to a few friends about this record after I've written this review, mind you, and it seemed there was a pretty even split between those who loved it, calling it the band's crowning achievement, and there were those who felt that maybe the band had fallen off the wagon, calling Holocene the worst record in the band's catalogue. I can comfortably say that I kind of land somewhere in the middle, Holocene is not as impactful to me as something like Pelagial or Precambrian, feeling less ambitious and not as memorable a record from start to finish. But I definitely prefer this to the likes of Heliocentric and Anthropocentric, and probably Aeolian as well. I feel that Holocene is a bold effort by a band that potentially ran the risk of stagnating, and as much as I think this album was necessary, as much as I would have probably enjoyed another identical Phanerozoic record, I understand why the band didn't want to roll that out again. That theme, that story and methodology in record writing feels complete. It feels like the band needed to write this album regardless of our own personal reception of it. For me, this feels in some ways kind of less like an epilogue to what came before, but the faltering steps of whatever is to come next. The band reaching out and experimenting with something new feels more in line with someone testing the proverbial waters rather than winding down what came before. And honestly, if The Ocean continues to explore this sound, to expand on the ideas that they've been playing with here on Holocene, I genuinely believe that we could have another Pelagial brewing somewhere in the background waiting to be unleashed. So, what else can I say about The Ocean's Holocene? This was a challenging record for me. My history and association with the band has been almost reverential in the past, and I will forever champion the band as being one of those few who has very few, if in fact no, bad records, just ones that aren't up to the impossible standards they've already set for themselves. Holocene is very much a case of a record that is not bad, it is a good record. I have enjoyed my time with this one a great deal, but it does fall under the shadow of the band's previous greatness, especially as we've been on an upwards climb since 2013, and this kind of represents maybe the first stumble from the band in around a decade. Have we fallen off the tightrope? No, not at all. But I think the stumble here is in some ways very important. It is at times necessary to make mistakes, to have these minor missteps so that we can look back and figure out where our footing went wrong, and then see how we can make whatever comes next to be even better. I am confident that the Ocean have learnt a lot from Holocene, and that they are going to take the lessons from the creation of this record and bring us something absolutely jaw-dropping in a few years' time when the album cycle churns into life once again. So what's the recommendation on this one? I think I would say at this point buying yourself a digital copy is the right way forwards. You know, I want to support the band, show them that I still believe in their course, but I didn't quite vibe the record enough to fill up my vinyl shelf with it. But, you know, I might just end up doing it anyway because frankly the album art slaps and it would look pretty darn snazzy on my shelves. This, guys, of course, is just my opinion, as you know, so if you have listened to this new, exciting The Ocean record, please tell me what you thought of it in the comments down below. If there's anything else coming out this year that you think I should check out, please point me in the right direction. I'd love to give it a listen, always looking for new stuff. If you did like this video, please do share it around with anyone else who you think would enjoy it, and please do consider subscribing to the channel for more content. If you really love what I do, please as well consider clicking the coffee link in the description box down below to help support the channel. And until next time, guys, keep your own signatures extremely, extremely odd.